Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies, including recent Blu-ray releases. And today I want to talk about a recent Criterion release a couple months ago in 2023. This is two films by Marguerite Duras, India Song and Baxter, VERA BAXTER. My previous video I talked about India Song. So today, take two, we'll cover Baxter, VERA BAXTER. And these two films are very similar in some ways, different in others. Similarity is these are two very challenging films. This is an oblique narrative. You have a sense that it's a deconstruction of traditional narrative, commercial filmmaking. How else can we tell a story? Another similarity between the two movies is both of them star Delphine Seyrig. Now, in India Song, the actors never talk to each other. India Song it has a narration, a sort of chorus of conversations that cover the events of the characters that we see in the visual frame, but they never talk to each other. Now, here in this film, Baxter, VERA BAXTER, the actors do talk to each other, but they talk slowly. There's many pauses. A question would be asked from one character, a long pause, and oui or no. And we have to puzzle out what these relationships are between these characters. That's very similar again to India Song, and also it is very much a story of infidelity and suicide. And we have another haunted house. In India Song, we had the Chateau Rothschild and sort of ghost-like characters wandering through the interior. Here we have a modern villa with glass. The walls are of glass, so we look out into the surrounding. It's sort of a forest where this villa is close to the sea, but it's also surrounded by forests the story. And in India Song, we had this floor-to-ceiling mirror where we see some of the action. So we have the same kind of motif of both glass and of sort of the foreground life, very somber, and then we see nature. Nature is from these windows, but we're sort of disconnected from that nature. So the film opens with a shot of who turns out to be the main character in the nude, but this is not. Marguerite Duras is not eroticizing the female body. It's sort of kind of like a painterly pose. A still life. And after that, we're in a cafe, and these are the scenes preceding the villa. The interior of the villa is pretty much the rest of the movie. And who appears other than a very young and somewhat trim Gerard Depardieu with blonde hair, which is quite a sight. We're never really sure who he actually is. We do figure it out as the narrative goes on, but certainly in the beginning of the film, it's very obscure. Much of it seems to be about should VERA BAXTER rent the villa in which she is, in which the two main conversations of the movie take place. And this is basically a conversation between VERA BAXTER and a former mistress of Vera's husband, who is not in the movie. We do hear his voice on the telephone, but he's off with a new mistress. And VERA BAXTER, it seems to be, she's there in this town, with her lover. But we can never really be sure too much about all of this. We have the conversation between a former mistress, and then we have a conversation with an unknown woman who is played by Delphine Seyrig. We have no idea what her relationship is. She is in the early cafe scene, and she'll pop up later. And so we have to piece together the past, the present, and what kind of future does Vera Baxter even have a future? Well, all of this somberness is performed with a very jaunty musical score. It's sort of a South American flute being used in a kind of folk music kind of way, and it very much counterpointing the somberness of the narrative as we experience it, but it's also played on an endless loop. The volume might rise and fall a little bit. A couple scenes it sort of disappears altogether, but it's a piece of music that isn't very long, and it's played on this endless loop. So a very unusual film, but I admire the formal beauty of both these films. And this film was photographed by Sacha Guthrie. The interiors of this villa is just beautiful to look at. And despite all the avant-gardeness of these two films by Marguerite Duras, they do have rather novelistic concerns. We have a puzzle to unravel. There's many novels that we can read, mystery novels, and there's themes. There's kind of novelistic kind of themes running through this film, in the sense of metaphor, in the sense of feminism. Marguerite Duras was an ardent feminist of her day. And in this era, I think she was already in her 60s, or maybe 50s or 60s. So, and her novels, and a couple of which I have read, she was part of the new novel, the new roman movement in France. Alain Robbe-Grillet, probably is famous, perhaps even more famous than Duras, in that. In that movement, and they were very similar, because Robbe-Grillet wrote the screenplay for Last Year at Marienbad. Marguerite Duras screenplay for Hiroshima Mon Amour. So they're novelists, screenwriters, and then Robbe-Grillet would also make some very avant-garde movies. I'm told Trans-European Express, I think with Jean-Louis Trenier being one of them. So they're very similar. But I think what I get from this film, and from Duras in general, I feel a love of cinema. I really do. I mean, it's an experience. It's an experience that I know Duras often compared to Antonioni, in the sense of looking. We need to see, where do we find consolation in life, where we feel disconnected, and we have to recover our ability to see. And I think Duras is very successful. Now, again, these are not films for everybody, and probably not really films for me. My great love is for commercial cinema made for a wide audience. But I like to, every once in a while, I like to see what's going on the edges of cinema, and especially in the 1970s, when there was so much experimentation going on. Intellectuals had a sort of cultural cachet, and people were open to the idea that there are other ways to tell stories, that not so generic. And once in a while, it's kind of nice to visit these things, and especially from 50 years ago. Now, this film comes, this release comes with a really nice booklet. It's very foggy. It's very much we are challenged to paint the portrait that we see on the cover here ourselves. It's got an excellent essay in the thrall of Duras, and this is by Yvonne Margolis, if I'm saying her name right, and we get some some images from the film that are probably quite properly dim. This is the villa in which very much of the conversations that occur in the movie are set, and the walls looking out into nature. So, and in the supplements, we get on India Song, we get a conversation with Delphine Seyrig, who says that she would sign a contract with Duras. We'll make one movie a month for a year, because these films were filmed, I think India Song was filmed in 12 days. And then we get a more recent documentary on the making of India Song, which is very good. Now on Baxter, VERA BAXTER, we get a archival interview with Marguerite Duras, where she talks about VERA Baxter, and then we get a very good hour-long documentary on Marguerite Duras' life, and we see her interviewed in various stages of her life. She had such a colorful lifetime experience. She was her persona was molded by her childhood experiences in Southeast Asia, where she lived in poverty. Her father died. Her mother had a bad business venture and went into despair. And Marguerite and her brother were pretty much left on their own. And but that experience of poverty has stayed with her all her life. And she says the other big event in her life that she can never escape from, that she thinks about all the time, was the experience of the Jews in World War II. And her husband was an inmate at Dachau camp, but he survived. He was almost dead, and she nursed him back to health. So definitely these kind of films very much relate to the autobiography of the director, and she's a very important figure, I think, in at least a couple different ways in both literature, and I recommended one of her novels, The Ravishing of Lil Stein, in my last video, but also in movies as well. So I was glad to finally get a chance to see what her movies were like, and as I said in the opening, they're challenging, but they are an experience. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.